a very famous burn salve that comes from a really ancient recipe. It was actually one of the very first salves that I ever made. I do want to share that, if it's a first or second degree burn, then burn salves work really well in home ready. Of course, if it's a third degree burn, then it's a medical situation, and the salves that we make can be used after medical attention. But simple mixture, you can buy it or you can make it. People know how to make remedies. That's one of the things I have tried to always do, is get people into the kitchen. It's a mixture of three herbs: comfrey, calendula, and St. John's wort. And all three of those herbs grow really readily in California. Tinctures are really simple. They're concentrated liquid extracts that are made all around the world, and they're usually made with an alcohol base. So usually it's a vodka, brandy, or gin, which is about an 80 proof. And you're placing your herbs in a quart jar, and you're covering them with an inch or two of the alcohol and letting it sit for about 6 weeks, shaking it every day to keep it agitated. I always say when you shake it, that's where you put the magic and the prayers in it. We had terrible wildfires when I was young. Nothing like what we saw just recently or in more recent years for certain, but there were thousands of acres that would burn. It was always interesting to me that within a year or two after those fires, how the earth just restored itself, really. Lots that we could do to help, so I am going to address that. But even when there is all that damage that we see, it really won't take for long. The earth has these remarkable rejuvenation properties. You see it like in places like Hawaii, or where there's been recent volcanic activity. Nothing will grow in that volcanic, lava for a few years, but then it's amazing the vitality that comes. Well, I would definitely focus on this big group of herbs that are really an exciting group called adaptogens, because those herbs are restorative to the system, just like we were talking about how the plants come in and they just start to restore the soil. Well, it's the same with these herbs. They come in and they help to restore the soul. These herbs are designed to kind of rejuvenate and rebuild and restore. They're not really medicines per se. They're more like foods that just feed and nourish the cells.
Welcome to your journey to find true tranquility with the Tranquility Magazine podcast, with your host, Jasmine Maya Royce. Today's episode featuring, you can find more information about tranquility on our website, tranquilitymagazine.com.
Today, I have the honor of interviewing Rosemary Gladstar. She has been practicing, living, learning, teaching, and writing about herbs for over 50 years. Considered a star figure in the modern herbal movement and often referred to as the Godmother of the American herbalism, Rosemary is an author of over 12 and soon 13 books. She is a co-founder and former director of both the International Herb Symposium and the New England Women's Herbal Conference, and the founding president of United Plant Savers, and a co-founder and original formulator of the Traditional Medicinal Tea Company. She is also the author of and teacher of the popular home study course, The Science and Art of Herbalism, which continues to inspire and teach many thousands of students around the world. Welcome to the show, Rosemary. I'm glad to have you. And my first question is always, what is your current mantra or state of mind?
Thank you, Jasmine. I'm honored to be here with you. So my current mantra, actually, this is a mantra that have used for years. It's from Thich Nhat Hanh, so you can imagine it's really about calming, right? So it goes, breathing in, I calm my body. Breathing out, I smile. Breathing in, I calm my body. Breathing out, I smile. I find it really appropriate for these times because that mantra is about breathing in. It's about taking in the breath of life and using that to calm our body, and then allowing it to go back out in a smile, which is basically just our smiles are gifts to the world, right? So it's about calming ourselves so that we can do better in the world. So I've said that quite often, sometimes when I'm driving in really hectic places, and sometimes for really big events when I just feel my heart racing and I'm like so nervous about what's coming down the pipeline.
Mm-hmm. I think it's amazing to have a mantra that keeps you focused. And you are right. Smiles are our gift, just being happy and being present in the moment. And also, I always counter that says nervousness is excitement. So you have to be more excited no matter what the situation is. And so
Yeah.
I try to embrace that more, but I also understand that, being in a situation or all those conferences that you've been to and public speakings, you have to get your mind in the right place to do all the presentations and the teaching that you've done. So
Yeah.
amazing. All the, like, you have years and years of experience, so it's going to be hard to have you do basics for me today. I wanted you to mention about your name and where it came from for you, and a little bit about that herb that you also are tied to.
Oh, great. Thank you. Well, so Rosemary is my birth name, but I really wasn't named after the plant. At least my parents didn't think so. I think I was, but they
Mhm.
named me after my grandmothers, after Rose and Mary. So, yeah, and rosemary is an herb that thrives in Mediterranean-like climates. Where I grew up in Northern California, the plant was like almost like a weed. I love weeds, so I can call it a weed appropriately. No, it grew almost tree-like. You have so many different rosemaries. It was a ground cover. We had big shrubs of it. It bloomed profusely. It has so many properties, along with being a wonderful culinary. But it's also an herb that is very high in anti-inflammatory, antioxidant properties. So people use it a lot for infections and for immune support. And it's one of the few herbs that we have that we actually know passes that brain-blood barrier and is a food for the brain. We know that through modern scientific studies, but also through ancient uses. So, like even Shakespeare, it's a famous quote, like, I rosemary for remembrance, he said in one of his great famous plays. But it's an herb that's used for helping to activate memory and just, especially as people are getting older, myself,
Mhm.
it's an herb that I take on a regular basis just for my memory and, general good health.
Yeah, I think it's an amazing one. And being born here, it's planted everywhere. So
Yeah.
the nice thing is when I normally would go on a walk around the block or anything like that, I would pull rosemary and then smell it with my fingers to start my day. And I always am very connected with that herb for my upbringing and my resources. So you mentioned that you're from Northern California. Which area are you born in?
I was born in a little town called Kenwood, California, in Sonoma County, close to Sonoma. But when I was growing up there, it wasn't the wine country. It was small dairy farms and small orchards. And yeah, it was a very rural community. I grew up in a dairy farming family, which I'm
Mhm.
very thankful for. Put me really close to the earth and around a ton of plants. So, it kind of started me on my pathway when I was quite young.
Yeah, I think then you understand, our climate and your connection with the earth. And I'm like that because I was raised in more Grass Valley and then became a Bay Area person. And I believe that, your connection with the earth here is also resonating with where you are in Vermont. So you know the zoning and the understanding for it. So, when you're talking about the earth and you delve into the idea, you have different sections in your books that talk about, plants and your relationship. But I want to talk about soil after the impact that we received on the fire, and also my worry about there's a lot of things that can impact our soil with the burn ratio of just the plants would be a better thing. You can speak about that, but also the salt water that we had to use in order to put the fires out. Do you have any recommendation that you would think as being a gardener, how to rejuvenate our soil after something
Yeah,
like
the remedial that happens. So when I grew up in Northern California, we had terrible wildfires when I was young. Nothing like what we saw just recently or in more recent years for certain, but there were thousands of acres that would burn. It was always interesting to me that within a year or two after those fires, how the earth just restored itself, really. Lots that
that?
we could do to help. So I am going to address that. But even when there is all that damage that we see, it really won't take the long. The earth has these remarkable rejuvenation properties. You see it like in places like Hawaii or where there's been recent volcanic activity. Nothing will grow in that volcanic, lava for
Hmm.
a few years. But then it's amazing the vitality that comes out of that. I'm using that as an example because that's
Hmm.
extreme. It's even, worse than what we're seeing right now with what happened. So we have to trust that nature does have the ability. And one of the things that we saw during COVID is when we weren't driving so much, we weren't flying so much. Within a very short time, within just a few months, the waterways cleared up, the air quality cleared up. We weren't helping with that other than stopping our mad activity, right? Our insane, our insanity.
Hmm.
And so, and the more that we as humans do our part as good inhabitants of this earth to help, the better it all will process. So there is a lot we can do. There are a lot of herbs that are very rejuvenating to the soil. What immediately comes to my mind is the legume family because they have the ability to go deep. They send roots deep into the soil, right? And
Hmm.
those deep roots actually help to bring up minerals and vitality from the deep soil up to the surface. So a lot of times organic gardeners are going to be planting cover crops of that legume family. So
Hmm.
that is one thing, and they can be very beautiful too, like the clovers, for instance, planting clover, it's hardy, it feeds
Hmm.
wildlife, it feeds birds, it helps to feed the pollinators, which of course are going to be decimated for a while. But
Hmm.
they will bring them back because where they have food, they come back to. So just planting clover, and it's beautiful. The other
Hmm.
thing is trusting in the weeds that come back. So the weeds oftentimes that come when there's been disturbances, like you see here would be an example, like they're putting in a new housing development and they've raised the soil, they've taken off the topsoil, they have bulldozers and big machines, and then the project stops and there's just this big wasteland, right?
Hmm.
Within a very short time, you see the weedy species coming in. Like the dandelions, the burdocks, the docks, all these very common plants,
Hmm.
very well known in California. And they're restoring soil. They're not only providing nutrients for us and good medicine for us, but they're also warrior plants that come in. They don't require a lot, and they're very, very non-fussy and good at taking care of themselves. But they
Hmm.
root deeply, and they bring nutrients. And again, once they start to colonize habitats again,
Hmm.
they're as good as colonizers as the white people, I want to say, in really good ways. They're non-native species, but want to trust them to come in and help to begin to heal the soil. And then the other thing that's happened in wilderness areas, like, I saw this in Northern California where I grew up, is after the fires, there's a tremendous display of wildflowers. It can take a year or two for them to come, but they're also hardy plants that oftentimes need space and need fire to release their seeds. So if
Hmm.
we can help out by getting, buying pounds, as many pounds as we can of the native wildflower seeds and just spread those. That's going to be a wonderful thing to help restore not only the soil, but also to invite the bees and the birds and all
Hmm.
those other life forms that depend on that habitat to survive, so
Yeah,
yeah.
I think it's amazing to a couple points you're making. I think at one point you're talking about the Paradise Fire, which is also kind of around your area that happened about 3 to 4 years ago, maybe no more than that. And it was very
Yeah.
devastating to that area, which is not far from where you are from originally. But also the idea, a person that was taught about gardening originally, like the landscaping, the design, the like look of everything, and weeds have a negative attribute. But when you become an herbalist or you learn about herbology, all these weeds are the best things ever, which they are native to the here. Like we have yarrow or we have, rosemary that would go back or dandelion root that I didn't even know that was so useful as
Yeah.
something to use. And it's the hardiness of the plants alone are amazing in their, willpower to reclaim their areas and make their mark and bloom no matter the weather over time. that I always applaud more than I used to as a kid, because you're raised to pull all of them. Like, get rid of the weeds, they have to go. And now it's just like, leave them alone. They're fine where they are. But wildflowers is an inspirational idea that you can go to any store and kind of pick those up to make sure that, roots are still there. And I'm sad about the trees that we lost more than anything, because it's devastating in the wilderness that we lost, but also the impact on the environment. You mentioned bees and birds that we need in order to have the seeds and the pollination for everything we eat. So I always remember those things that are predominantly important to understand. So years of being an herbalist and recommending, briefly describe if you were meeting a new client and you'd never really been introduced before, and what were some of the questions that you would ask this person before you start your recommendations?
That's a really good question. I think the first thing is just making them comfortable, just asking how they're doing. How was their drive, and then just asking what sounds like a very general overall question, just how are you feeling, and then you begin to kind of hone it down. So what brought you here today, So the general overall, how are you feeling? And creating a space where it really allows people to really share that with you. And then what brought you here today? And so those are, you start with those general questions always so that there's a comfortability and where there's a physical contact, like a shaking of a hand or a welcoming, but also where there's this energetic, you're beginning to see, you're looking at how the person is and what the color of their skin is and the condition of their hair and all of those various things that are little telltale things that they're actually relaying to you without saying anything. The actual questioning part, usually all of us who are in practice, we have some kind of form that we sort of follow, not exactly. When you walk into any doctor's office or a dentist's office, they hand you this very static form and you fill out the same questions every single time. They glance at them really quickly and that's it. But every single thing on that form is a story, and so if you can just I never ask anybody to fill it all out. It's you fill out what's really important, and then you kind of hone in. You ask a little bit more about this and that, and you look for repeated patterns. Like if you see a lot of things highlighted in that section on women's health or men's health, you kind of highlight in that. I always ask questions too about, what brings you the greatest joy, and what's your greatest challenge right now? And they seem like just kind of general questions, but they actually really help to paint a picture. That's what you're really trying to get. A lot of times you ask them what brought them in to see you, and they give you, a story. And then almost every practitioner, a lot of them will say this. It's almost after the whole intake when they're walking out, that last final thing. There's always this aha where they turn around and say, oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you about da 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 da. And then some magical piece of the story is put together. It's like, oh, that might have been the most important thing that you said today. So yeah, that, is that answering your question?
Yeah, the generality in order for people who have never been introduced or never found an herbalist out there, kind of curious about the formalities or your proper and positive interactions to create a connection is important to understand, but also figuring out what brought them there is very helpful to understand, because everyone could have different issues and maybe looking for some resolve or some ways of healing certain elements that they're dealing with. So I think
absolutely. I would say absolutely. By the time a person comes to see you, they're oftentimes kind of at the end of the rope of trying so many. Today it's a little different because herbalism is much more acceptable, and a lot of people are looking for complementary types of medicine, more natural things. But I would say in earlier years, it was like when they came to see the herbalist, it's because nothing else worked.
Yeah.
Right? They tried everything. So they were sort of, and absolutely, there's usually a specific goal in mind. So, we do have these forms. And when I said, it's not like I think what I was meaning by that is sometimes you sit there and you fill out the very same thing over and over again, check, check, check. You're not even sure if anybody really is looking at that thoroughly. But, with herbalists, I would say the majority of them, that first session especially is almost always an hour or an hour and a half. It's usually very thorough, that first, when you're first meeting an herbalist, they're going to want to ask, about your diet and your exercise and, your favorite foods and how much you actually move and how much you sit, because all those things are very important to understanding what that disease or imbalance might be that you're seeking relief from. So there's a bigger picture rather than I have this problem and I need a medicine for it. You're trying to look at lifestyle a lot and try to correct the foundation of what's causing the problem. I would say there's a lot more of that in holistic healing than we see sometimes in allopathic practice. It's very seldom that a medical doctor, even if they want to, has an hour and a half to sit with a patient. It's usually like on a 10-minute, 20-minute basis. Sometimes you're not even getting comfortable in that time, right? A person is just hardly has time to really even dig down and bring up what really has brought them. So, I would say that's one of the advantages of herbal medicine. There's usually a whole lifestyle component to looking at the remedies.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand the variation and the difference between dealing with an herbalist and a doctor. Well, herbalists can be doctor certified, but just an actual medical practice that you're going in to resolve an issue that you have. And you are right that especially here in LA, you don't have 20 minutes. You have a short, brief, once over, prescribe something in the door and out before it even is over. And you didn't even express anything that you're currently dealing with. And I'm a person that is in the doctor's office more than often for me and my recovery. So it's a different, one that I learned to be aware of through my time. And I understand that, providing a safe space and that quality of time to understand either the mental and also the lifestyle is very important to understand what's going to work, I would suggest, or for your experience, what's to better the situation and to deal with the foundation that you speak upon. So in your myriad of books and all the collections, you have so many recipes and so many interesting elements. And I want to briefly talk about a couple ways and either suggestions on making something or an herb that would pair well with. And after the recent fires, the first one I would ask is, what is a recommendation when you're dealing with a person in their mid-ages, we'll say 35 to 45, they suffered with a wound on their arm, a burn, and how to recover that burn with an herbal remedy that you would suggest or make for them?
Yeah, that's a great question because we do have a very famous burn salve that comes from a really ancient recipe. It was actually one of the very first salves that I ever made. I do want to share that, if it's a first or second degree burn, then burn salves work really well and home ready. Of course, if it's a third degree burn, then it's a medical situation and the salves that we make can be used after medical attention, but definitely for first and second degree burns, it's a fabulous salve and it's been used, as I said, for hundreds of years. It's a simple mixture. You can buy it or you can make it. People know how to make remedies. That's one of the things I have tried to always do is get people into the kitchen, if you like to cook. It's so simple and easy to make herbal remedies. People have been doing it for hundreds of years in their kitchen with just a few ingredients and, simple whatever you have in the house. But it's a mixture of three herbs: comfrey, calendula, and St. John's wort. And all three of those herbs grow really readily in California. So you can grow them. I mean, they will be up and fully grown in a season, right? And they're very, very easy to grow. St. John's wort, of course, is a weed that the Department of Agriculture and our government tries to eradicate because of the damage it does to livestock. I totally understand, but it's perfectly safe for people to use. But all three of those herbs have a remarkable ability to heal tissue. And I've used them myself on numerous burns, on some very serious burns, and others just, I'm cooking and I get a little grease on my hand. And I've had really great results, and I've seen them work really well for serious burns. So the other thing that people can use is aloe vera gel. Aloe vera gel, aloe grows everywhere in California also, and it's very easy to reestablish. I'm sure that whatever aloe was growing in people's yards, et cetera, is gone. But aloe plant, it will come back. It's very, very tenacious. It will restore, again, do that restoration we were talking about. Anyway, that aloe gel is very soothing, especially to first degree burns and just, irritated skin and rashes. It's so healing. It's very rich in allantoin, and allantoin is just good for tissue. It's a really good herb for soothing. So
yeah, smart ideas to have accessible just if you live in a burn area or someone that's already just been through that or just have it on hand. And aloe, a great resource here in California that you can buy it in the store, you can get it anywhere for the most part. So in after the effect or during the effect of the fire for us here, respiratory and breathing abilities were having harder times, especially for me, that I realized that it was a very much a way of dealing with the air quality, which we have a lot in a high traffic city that you were talking about before, about traffic and planes and toxicity of the air itself here. And respiratory, I believe there's also a disease that's going around that's kind of related to the respiratory factor. What would you recommend for those of us to make or implement when it comes to respiratory breathing?
Well, I have to say, I just think it should be common knowledge for everybody in the Southern California area to know about these plants, because for a long time, the air quality is going to be compromised. And, as you were saying, when you live in an area, as beautiful as it is, but where the air is compromised, people need to be thinking of their respiratory systems all the time, because our lungs were developed to breathe clean, fresh air, and filters. They're very highly developed filters, but when we're always clogging those filters, we know what happens. So even people who are very thoughtful about smoking and living really, eating really healthy foods and organic foods and all of that,
Yeah.
when you're breathing this constant air that's just difficult for your lungs, it becomes very challenging. So I do have a really good article I published on my website that was specifically when we had those fires. I wrote it when we had those fires up in Northern California for the very same reason. So one really good respiratory tonic would be to take an herb like coltsfoot and mullein and to blend it with a mucilaginous herb like licorice and marshmallow. So to keep it really simple, just something mucilaginous that's good for the lungs. So mucilaginous is soothing for inflammation, right? So something that's soothing. And so licorice would be a really good choice. Not everybody, this is licorice root, not licorice candy.
Yes.
Not everybody loves licorice root.
And marshmallow root is not marshmallows.
Yeah, and marshmallow root is but marshmallow, that big gooey candy, was originally made from the marshmallow root. So that's the history. But yeah, the root is very different than the marshmallow candy. That's for sure. Thank you, Jasmine. So, but it's something soothing because the lungs are irritated, right? And then mixing in respiratory tonics. So I usually would say mullein, which again is a weedy plant that grows throughout California. And it's one of the early plants, one of the first plants that comes back into burn areas, interestingly enough. And it's a specific for respiratory issues. It's both a respiratory tonic and a medicine for the respiratory system. A tonic meaning something that's soothing and can be used over a period of time. Those would be good herbs. And then for that, another herb too that's got mucilaginous properties in it that's specific for the lungs and also is good for any kind of respiratory infection that's happening is a plant called elecampane. It's got kind of a fancy name, elecampane, but it's a member of the sunflower family. It's a wild sunflower, and it's a fruit that's used. It's very easy to find in herb stores, and it's not expensive.
So in your books that you have a very broad selection, I believe you have a couple placements for recommending to make a tincture and understand what a tincture is. Can you briefly describe what a tincture is to make and to understand maybe a recommendation of your book collection, which one would be good to understand how to make a tincture?
Yeah, well, for beginners, I would definitely recommend the book Medicinal Herbs, A Beginner's Guide, because it was written for people who know nothing. So that one, who are interested, who want to use herbs for home health care, and that doesn't at all preclude, medical care. It's how to use herbs in conjunction with your doctor or whatever. So it's a really good book for beginners. It talks a lot about safety and has recipes. So tinctures are really simple. They're concentrated liquid extracts that are made all around the world, and they're usually made with an alcohol base. So usually it's a vodka or brandy or gin, which is about an 80 proof brandy. Let's say we're using brandy, but it could be vodka or gin or any 80 proof alcohol. And you're placing your herbs in a quart jar and you're covering them with an inch or two of the alcohol and letting it sit for about 6 weeks, shaking it every day to keep it agitated, keep the herbs from not settling down on the bottom. I always say when you shake it, that's where you put the magic and the prayers in it, make a good medicine. And then you strain that and you basically have a liquid extract. Not everybody wants to use alcohol either because of it being a disease for them or religious purposes. So you can make tinctures with apple cider vinegar and or glycerin, vegetable glycerin. They'll be a little bit different in the properties and constituencies, and they're not quite as strong, but they actually work fairly well as well. So it's really easy. And people use tinctures because they're quick and they're easy and they don't have to brew up a lot of tea. But, I think that I don't use tinctures in place of teas. I use them in addition. I use tinctures when it's acute, when something's coming on, or in this case, when people are displaced from their homes, they're maybe feeling a lot of illness and stuff. Using tinctures are really recommended because they're quick, easy, and can be very inexpensive. When you buy them in the stores, they're costly because it takes somebody a lot of time to grow those herbs and make that medicine for people.
Yeah.
It's a lot of attention and time growing herbs and then making these medicines, but it's very, very affordable. You buy a quart of brandy and it doesn't have to be a high quality, and you just pour it over your herbs. If you grow echinacea, you just make a beautiful echinacea tincture and there you go. Home medicine at its finest.
I love it, but also to describe kind of how you make one of your collections of remedies and how to preserve the herbs and keep them on hand for longer periods, or how to make them for a tincture. Sometimes it's confusing to understand for a novice not knowing, but I also agree with you. And I love the moment that you were talking about the idea of spreading the magic. I always say there's two things that I do that for: soups. I'm creating my potion of choice. And I read a book once that was called Words on Water, and how the words create the water's look in as icicles and little touches of the words and their effect on the remedies or the water itself. And vodka or brandy cannot be disturbed by stirring the right thing to it to create the right properties to make it more valuable and more interesting. I love that you talked about that.
Yeah.
So in the idea of, I know they're linked in a concept that stress can, or depression can lead to stomach issues, in my understanding. I may be wrong in that. But for two of the different things, what are your recommendations first for stomach ailments, like indigestion or maybe heartburn or something like that? And then kind of pairing off to kind of talk about a long-term remedy or added herbs for dealing with stress or depression.
Yeah. Well, so I would say stress and depression can lead to a lot of imbalances in our body, because we're depressed. And when we're depressed, we're not functioning well. So right now I can totally understand. I mean, I would like to make a big, huge vat of lemon balm tea and feed everybody that in LA, and all of those beautiful little towns in the South there. So for stomach stress, and especially if the stomach issues are related to stress, lemon balm and chamomile are a perfect remedy. Chamomile is sometimes disregarded because it's, so readily available and it's so sweet, and it's like this little, pretty yellow flower, pretty white flower with little petals on it. But it's a very strong herb for the nervous system, and it's also a digestive aid, because even though when you brew it lightly, you get kind of a sweet flavor, when you brew it a little bit longer, you get the bitter principles. And the bitters are really good for digestion. They help to stimulate gastric juices. They help to calm the stomach. They help to stimulate the liver, so the liver is functioning better. So oftentimes our digestive problems start in our liver. Our liver gets congested, overworked, overtired, and then our digestion just gets really sluggish because of that. So bitter herbs that are rich in bitter principles, which you always can taste the bitters, those herbs are really recommended. So chamomile is good for digestive stress, stress that's related to digestion. And I love to blend it with lemon balm because lemon balm is uplifting to the spirits. It's actually an herb it's considered an antidepressant. The old words for the old-fashioned words, was used for hysteria. Hysteria was the term that they used for depression, And so, yeah, lemon balm tastes delicious. It's so good. So, and then, so much of it, digestive issues are complicated because there's so many things that cause it. Some is stress, definitely. So, but some would be just food combinations that we eat that cause a lot of gas. They don't digest well together. So that's difficult. So that's addressed just by what you're eating. But the other thing that I always look at is using things that are very soothing to the inflammatory condition of the stomach. And I love herbs like mallow, again, the marshmallow, because mucilage, and it's very soothing to the intestines. So, and then just ginger is another one. You can mix ginger and marshmallow together, the mallow, and then adding like those aromatic seeds like fennel seed or dill seed. They were always used as digestive calmatives. They help calm the digestion. They help with any kind of external turtle gas that's happening. They just help the digestion move better. So, but I would say, just to respond again, if the digestive issues are caused by stress, I would really emphasize chamomile and lemon balm. Just a really good comment. And lavender is another one, believe it or not. Lavender is another herb that can be very helpful for digestive stress, but it's very strong tasting. So you have to use just a small amount of it.
Yeah, lavender I've never really loved too much in like cooking when it's strong and kind of not my particular favorite, but doesn't matter. I love the smell of it and I love anything like that, but I have a hard time eating.
Well, and people add it to their teas, but what happens is it's so dominating in a tea, and all that aromaticness of the lavender is almost too much in your taste. So it is really lovely. Herbs of Provence, that's a really nice culinary blend. And so long as I don't add too much of that lavender, it's actually quite nice in there. But I think the problem is really that people just get heavy-handed on the lavender because it smells so lovely and it looks very beautiful in a tea blend, but it can be very over-dominating. So I agree. I like it in little dosages in the tea. When we were talking about the respiratory system too, I forgot to mention that doing herbal steams, like putting a little eucalyptus in a pot of water, like the whole leaves, if you have any of the trees still around, I'm imagining those trees got burnt up pretty well because they're so full of oil. But if there's any eucalyptus leaves, or you could even use drops of essential oil, and then just breathing that up is so good for the lungs and the respiratory system. So I just wanted to mention that, kept popping into my mind and I forgot to say it. So
no, I love when ideas come later. I always say that like sometimes when you don't think about it, the most inspirational ideas come for you. So thank you for those understandings. That really helps with most people, especially here, kind of dealing with the loss of everything in their whole neighborhood and their environment, trying to process and like what you're left with the idea that stuff doesn't really matter. Like things are things, connections, friendships, being a human, and understanding the value of the land more so because we cleared land, so to speak, in a way that we've cleared house to start again. And in that, like, you need to take care of you as a person to start rebuilding. And those are our prime ideas that we need to start healing our internal needs and understanding what our body is going through for these different times. Now I want to have you suggest, because it's spring and the sun's up longer and we're going to see more energy kind of flowing in just by having more vitamin D. What did you recommend for herbal remedies to kind of have energy and energize us to move forward and kind of inspire us to rebuild or recreate?
Well, I would definitely focus on this big group of herbs that are really an exciting group called adaptogens, because those herbs are restorative to the system, just like we were talking about how the plants come in and they just start to restore the soil. Well, it's the same with these herbs. They come in and they help to restore the soul. They just help us to find inside, chemically and physically. These herbs are designed to kind of rejuvenate and rebuild and restore. They're not really medicines per se. They're more like foods that just feed and nourish the cells. So there's a big group of them, and some of them are rhodiola, which rhodiola is an herb that's not native to North America. Well, I shouldn't say that. It does grow. It's native to the cold Northeast where I live up in the high mountains and stuff. But most of it is found in like Himalayas and in Mongolia and Siberia, right? So if you live in a really cold weather a cold weather place, you could grow it. It's a very beautiful plant. It's a succulent and it has beautiful flowers, actually, beautiful succulent flowers on it. You never would think that this plant has this, ancient and remarkable ability to just kind of rejuvenate and regenerate our own bodies. So rhodiola is one of the herbs that is really recommended, especially for people just feeling sluggish and they're having a hard time getting going. It's a good herb to use. And then there's also an herb called Siberian ginseng that is a distant member of the ginseng family, but it's not a taproot. All the ginsengs, all of the Panax ginsengs and the native ginsengs that we have growing in this country are really at risk in their native environment. And I think we have to be very, very, very thoughtful about how we use them and when. But Siberian ginseng has very similar properties, and it grows in large amounts. It's a great big shrub. I have one growing at Sage Mountain at the Herbal Retreat Center. I planted a stick and it grew into an enormous shrub. And they don't dig the whole plant. They dig parts of the root, and the plant continues to grow. But that herb is also very restorative to the system, very rejuvenating. Another herb that's worth looking at right now for people is an herb called ashwagandha, which we generally, strange name, ashwagandha. It comes from the Ayurvedic system, the ancient East Indian system of healing. And it has a 5,000-year history of being used in India for helping to restore and rejuvenate energy. It's calming. It's an herb that both calms and then gives energy because we're calm and relaxed. It's a bit of an oxymoron when we think about it, because when we're thinking of stimulants, we think of herbs like coffee and black tea, right? And those herbs do not calm, and they don't, they're really overstimulating, overactivating, and they can be very hard on systems that are really stressed out because it's overstimulating the nervous system. Where these herbs like ashwagandha and Siberian ginseng and rhodiola are calming to the system while energizing it. We're really getting cellular energy. We're not going in and saying our bodies are tired, we're going to whip it a little bit more into action. We do have herbs that do that. We have guarana and kola and coffee, and they're remarkable, wonderful herbs. But they really, I don't want to say should not, but we really need to be very thoughtful about how we use them when we're stressed and when we're nervous, because they agitate the nervous system. That's how they work in the body. So another herb that I love that's a wonderful adaptogenic herb is Schisandra. And again, herb has a really, kind of exotic name, but it's sold in nurseries as magnolia vine. So people grow it in their houses. It grows beautifully in California and also in New England, where I live now. And it's the little berries that are used. They have a long history of being used. Sometimes they're considered sexual tonics, especially they were used by women, but they really rejuvenate the whole body, and they're, again, another herb that you can use in tincture form or tea, powdered capsule, and it just helps to rejuvenate. I think that the word right now that we have to look at on the earth in so many ways is that word of regeneration and rejuvenation, not herb, the word of regeneration and rejuvenation, because in so many ways we need to have that fresh flow of energy coming into our souls and our minds and our bodies. And I would certainly say that for people who have just suffered through this horrific fires. I don't want to ignore, I want to say one other thing, Jasmine. Like I was mentioning herbs that are adaptogens, and they're a lot of them are brought in from other countries, or if they're grown here, they're cultivated. But we have weedy species that actually are completely rejuvenating for the body. So you had mentioned it earlier, like dandelion is an incredible tonic for the system. And burdock root is another one. Dandelion is considered one of the top 10 medicinal plants in the world. The United States is the only country in the world that has a war against it with ortho. It's Ortho's cover girl. Most parts of the world, that plant is highly regarded as an incredible medicinal plant. So it's very, very restorative to the soil and to our bodies.
Yeah, there's so many points that I want to expand upon in there, but I want to highlight. Okay, so burdock root for me, I learned about it when I was in England, and I love the taste when it's added to an Earl Grey, which was my favorite tea for a long time. When I was didn't know any but much about herbology and didn't know about herbalism, I kind of briefly knew the idea, but I wasn't really
Yeah.
invested in learning. And then going back, I started taking ashwagandha before with holy basil when I found out what holy basil means and what it is and what are the benefits. Because with the name alone, I thought it was very important. So, but ashwagandha, you're right, is like a very predominant herb that I've been taking for a while for me before I got into herbology because it was helping with the stress, and the holy basil was an additive. But I wanted you to add a little bit about your viewpoints on making the herbal pills, or the idea of creating them, or how to buy them, or what would you suggest when it comes to pill form remedies?
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to years ago, like I'm talking about 45 years ago when I was running my herb store in Sonoma County. I didn't really sell capsules because the quality of the capsules were so bad. Like you'd
Hmm.
open up a capsule, and if it's an herb, it should smell like an herb and it should look like an herb and taste like an herb. But really, it just looked like sawdust. It's just the quality
Hmm.
was bad. So in some of my early books, I'm even saying that, use tinctures, use powders, because powders you can stir into drinks, you can put them in your blender shakes. A lot of times you can dissolve in your herb tea or use teas. But
Hmm.
the companies have some of the companies that have to qualify that, but there are some herb companies now that make really high quality herbal products, herbal capsules, and they're organically grown, they're sustainably grown, fair trade. They're really, really conscious about what they're producing. And you can just tell. It's the same with a tea bag. You open up a tea bag, and if it looks like dust in there and it doesn't have an aromatic smell, or it smells like a perfume, like a synthetic scent, then you know that it's not good quality. So I always recommend, wasting a capsule to see if it meets the testing, if it's our organic liptic tester, that part of us that uses our senses. It smells like an herb, it looks like an herb, and it tastes like an herb, right?
True.
So, but yeah, so using capsules a day can be really well. You do want to remember though, when you take herbal capsules, they have to go through your whole system. They have to go, be digested, processed, and then
Hmm.
pass into your bloodstream. So for acute situations, they're not going to be as good. And if you have a compromised digestion, you're not going to get as much of that herb as if you were taking it in liquid form. Tinctures, because they're in an alcohol base, go into the bloodstream in a few seconds. It's usually, I think, 15 seconds or something. It's in your bloodstream and circulating. And teas, because they're liquid, also bypass most of the digestive system. They're more rapidly and readily available for the system. You can make your own herbal pills, by the way. I call them my
Hmm.
little pill balls. And I just, I take the powder like a formula or a single powder, and I just mix it with honey and a little bit of you can add a little liquid, like a drop or two of tincture, water if you want, or an herb tea to just give it a little bit more moisture. The honey by itself makes it too sticky. So,
Hmm.
like if you were adding 3/4 part honey, you'd add at most a fourth of part liquid. Even that's too much. It's just a few drops. And then you stir it into a paste. Like if you've ever made bread dough and you kind of knead it and it gets kind of smooth and, and the stickiness is gone. So you're just kind of kneading it that way. And I usually will add another powder, oftentimes cacao powder or a good cocoa powder,
Hmm.
and something that thickens it nicely. You can sometimes add a little cinnamon powder, but usually the cocoa powder really blends it well, gives it a nice flavor. And then you just roll them into these little pea-sized pill balls.
Hmm.
And you can just dry them at room temperature, and then you have them. It's not the favorite remedy for people to make. My students often write back and say, I didn't make the pill balls, but I love making them. And especially for sore throats,
Hmm.
any kind of mouth infection or sore throats, because you just suck on them. They taste really delicious, and the herb is absorbed into your body that way.
Yeah, you recommend them in your books that I have on hand, and I like the idea that I never really thought about making my own pill form before, and I was like, "Oh, this is a good idea." And then you demonstrate there's photographs about it as
Yeah.
well. And I like that, but also I found for our interview, you do have going back to the energy concept, you have your own YouTube where you make, I believe, called energy balls.
Zoom balls, my famous Zoom balls.
Zoom balls, yeah. So the
Yeah.
Zoom balls is out there. I'll put the link in the bio so people can have the opportunity to watch you in your work to demonstrate how to make one of these energy balls that I thought was fascinating to watch you kind of in your own kitchen, in your own domain, which was very enlightening. But speaking about your teaching and your courses, speak to me about the science and art of herbalism and how that become something that you have started and what kind of avenues other people can join up or, want to learn about herbalism from you.
Well, I started at herb school in California, the California School of Herbal Studies in like 1976.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still running. It's still in Forestville, California. It's been ongoing since then, run by different people, of course, since I moved to Vermont. And it was when I was running the herb school this was back in the late 70s and early 80s. I had so many people who wanted to study, but they couldn't travel across the country. So I started this correspondence course that was based on our 10-month program at the school. And so that was back in 1981. And I've, of course, updated, but it was one of the earliest home study courses. There was another one that was offered by an elderly herbalist up in Canada, wonderful Dominion Herbal School. It was wonderful, but it long since passed. It's no longer available. So I've just been doing this course for the last 40 years, right? And I have thousands of people that have graduated. It's a home study course. You can work on your own time. There's a printed version of it as well as an online version, and there's lots and lots of videos. So it's basically a deep dive into herbalism. It's not a course for somebody who goes, oh, I just wonder what this is about. It's if you are really interested in plants and you really want to learn them, this is like coming to herb school. And we have a group of teachers. We're one of the few schools that still hand reviews every lesson that comes in and sends them back to the students either through email or through the mail. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been wonderful and fun. I loved it, actually. It's a way, I don't travel and teach so much anymore. So this is a way that I can still offer my love of plants to the world and just do it from my home.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to put the link for your website there and, so people can find out if it's the right course for them, if they want to go full into herbalism, because it's not a novice course. It's an actual certification, and you being, so award-winning and so well-known, it would be a predominant one for a lot of us to take. So in that, speaking about what you're doing, because I read that, moving to Vermont, you're on a course to write new books and understand, how to submit your knowledge in a broader spectrum with more knowledge in a book format. You have a new book coming out. So do you want to share about the secret teaching of the plants or sacred teaching of the plants coming out soon?
Well, it's actually called The Generosity of Plants, and I'm really, really excited about this book, probably more than any of my others, because it's not an instruction book of how to use plants. It's more of an inspiration book about the plants. And I'm really proud to say I'm not the author. I was the gatherer of this information. It's really a shared offering from herbalists around the world and plant lovers. It's not just herbalists. It's people who love plants, farmers, ethnobotanists, scientists, doctors. I've quoted from different people. I'm a great lover of quotes and musings, and so over the many, many years, I had these big files of, I'd be in a conversation with somebody and they'd just say something incredible and I'd write it down. So this is a collection of those plant musings and plant teachings and plant reflections. So yeah, and it goes, all the way from, how to, talking about gathering plants and gardening with plants, to the sacred teachings of plants, to the elders' teachings. I've had the good fortune to work with a lot of amazing elders in my life. This was when I was a young person, before I was an elder myself. And I have some beautiful quotes from the elders. So yeah, and I think that the thing I really love about this book is that, you don't have to read it. You can just open it up and just, turn to a beautiful page, because every page is it's illuminated with a beautiful, photo or artwork or plant pressing. So it's visually just like a feast as well. Mm-hmm. But it's really like a reflection of plants. So I had so much fun working on this book because it was a creative project. All my other projects were like, okay, let me teach you how to do this, and if you've got illnesses, here's things you can do for that. And this was just so much more of a creative, fun project.
It's exciting. And also, I like that you mentioned about the elders, that you were lucky enough, because your book that I have on hand too is this one, the homemade remedies or recommendations. They do have short stories in there about the gypsy that inspired you, the elders in itself, and more of the knowledge base that you were lucky enough to experience in your 20s, and like navigating all the resources you had at the time and those people that inspired you and taught you more than you knew going in, which is great, to kind of flip through. And all your books are great that I have that are kind of flip through find, the remedies and the elements to kind of heal you with what you have. And I believe, if you want to have anything on hand, one of your books is predominant like need for every home to kind of have access to your wisdom and your teachings about how to heal yourself from what you have and what Mother Earth has given you. So I always have two questions at the end of every interview. And the first one is, what is the best advice you've ever received?
The best advice I've ever received. Yeah, I don't even know who I received it from, but I think, it has to do with how we have no control what goes on in the world around us, or very little control. Things happen all the time, but what we do have is our response, so it's like, I think it really helped me a lot in my life. There were sometimes I wished I had a lot more control, but things would just be going on. Sometimes it's storms, nature, that you can't control it. You get blown off course because of some enormous storm, and or a fire that comes and destroys your home. So these huge things, or politics, or anything like that, right? These huge things happen. But what we do have charge of totally is our response to the world and our attitude. And I want to say that I would qualify that and say there's sometimes that we don't have total control. There's sometimes I react because I haven't done my mantra and breathed in and calmed my body. But when I come fully into my power, I do have control over my response of things. How I want to respond to the world around me is fully mine to choose. I just have to center myself in order to do that. Sometimes I have to take long, deep breaths. Sometimes I have to withdraw from the world to do it. But ultimately, I am responsible for my attitude and my response to the world. So, yeah.
It's a very important thing for all of us to understand that we do not have control over the world, the environment, decisions out of our hands, and how we react and how we deal with it is our own response. You are correct. And most people need to revisit that idea and kind of be present with the idea that you only have control over yourself, and that's the only control you have, because otherwise the environment is out of our hands, which it can make you frustrated and, devastated, or any results that could get you in a different direction, that you can't solve all the world's problems just being a solo entity, but you can solve your own. So thank you for that, Rosemary. I think it's a beautiful idea to remind us and to reframe our inner workings. And my last question is always, what is the best thing you gathered and you processed from the hardest experience in your life?
Well, I think of a Mary Oliver quote when she said, one day someone I love gave me a box full of darkness. It took me years for me to realize that it too was a gift. And, I've contemplated that a lot. I've had some major tragedies like everybody has in their life. And what is it I take out? That box full of darkness. What is it that you take from it? And so I think really what it is, that grief is a very powerful teacher as well. And that when you allow yourself to dive deeply into grief, and you're remembering that there's light there somewhere, there is so much to learn from that place. It's not like you maybe will never get over it, or maybe never even feel better about it, but we learn to adapt. I think that's the thing, like just how we grow. Again, it has a lot to do with our choice, like how we choose to grow through it. But yeah, remembering that even the darkest times can be a gift to us if we choose to look at it that way. And again, I would say it's not always easy. I think it took me 5 years to figure out where the light was. It took me a long time of just really allowing myself to be in that box of darkness.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I would just say that, in everything that comes our way, again, if we choose, if we can, and the choosing, I want to say it's a practice. It's not like all of a sudden you wake up and you're able to, think about what your response wants to be, or that the box of darkness has light in it somewhere. It's a practice every day, so that when our house is burned down or the people that we love most die, we're able to, maybe we built the community that we need. Because I want to say that we don't do this alone ever. We always do it with community and others. Like, the way that people are getting through those fires is not that they're standing out there alone clearing their yard. It's that they know that they're being supported by a community. When you go into that darkness, knowing that there's people that are holding the light for you. So it's a practice, and it does take work every day, so that when we come to that darkness, we know how to navigate through it, I would say.
Yeah. Wise ideas to remember and being aware of. Community is a very predominant, friends,
Yeah.
family, all the connections that you mentioned about guiding lights. And universe knows that, like, most of us have an experience with living on the dark side, and some of us are more familiar with the dark side than navigating. You said 5 years. It's taken me a long time to get out of the dark side to find my own light. So being that for other people, and also knowing how to sit with it and help other people that are in their dark realms to figure out how to phoenix out of it, rebirths, restarts, rebeginnings. And because it's important to experience the darkness for a time when you need to process it.
And I would like to say too that being an herbalist or a gardener or a farmer who works with plants is so helpful, because the plants are always about heading to the light, right? They're always about restoring, rejuvenating, like we were saying this earlier, when there's a burn, when there's devastation, when there's volcanic eruptions, when the earth is naturally or because of what we're doing to it is in, those plants will come back, and they come back with full force and with amazing beauty. And they freshen the air, and they feed us, and they heal us. So, the plants are an amazing vehicle for standing in the light.
Well, you are, the godmother of American herbalism, and it's been a delight, Rosemary Gladstone, to have you on the show today. And I appreciate all your knowledge and wisdom and support for all of us kind of recovering and understanding what we have as a resource already available to us that we can utilize and use going forward to help us heal and recover. I am very grateful, and I'm going to put all the links in the bio so everyone can find you that I know, to make sure that they can utilize your skill set, as well as many others that you've already inspired. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Jasmine. Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to the Tranquility Magazine podcast. Please subscribe and add your questions to our Q&A. We want to give a thank you to our team for their effort in creating every episode and our content at tranquilitymagazine.com.